This may look like an ordinary compact disc, but actually, it's an interactive encyclopedia. A stimulating match with a tennis pro. An interactive adventure through fantastic worlds.
In the history of gaming, there has been some expensive consoles, probably the most notorious of which in recent memory is when the PS3 first launched for $600. But when you reach further back, that is absolutely nothing compared to the Philips CDI. Released back in 1991, the original model of the CDI launched for $1,000. Adjusted for inflation today, that is just over $1,800. That is almost 4 times the price of an Xbox One X. Now, the reason for this insane price point is because when the CDI was originally conceptualized and marketed, it wasn't supposed to be just another gaming console. It was supposed to be new, this idea of a multimedia device that is somewhere between a gaming system and a PC and Mac, where, yeah, it'll play games, but you can also listen to music, watch videos, it have all kinds of different kind of educational apps, and even Madonna karaoke? Yeah, I'm not doing this. Basically, the CDI was trying to do things during the 4th generation of gaming that really didn't become normal or popular until the 6th or even 7th generation. It was way ahead of its time. It even was one of the first systems to offer an online component where you could buy a separate accessory with a modem that would allow you to connect to the internet to do some browsing or even shop online. Now, despite all these different things that it could do and its insane price tag at launch, it's not really known for any of these things still. There's really only one thing the CDI is still popularly talked about today, and that's what it did with Nintendo.
Why'd you do that?
I just saved you from Ganon.
You did not.
Back when Nintendo was developing the Super Nintendo, one of the things they were working on possibly doing was a CD attachment for the system, similar to something they had done back with the original Famicom called the Famicom Disk System, and something that we saw Genesis do with the Sega CD. Except this plan never actually came to fruition. Now, when they were working on it, there were 2 main companies they worked with: Sony, who would be making the actual hardware for the system, and Philips, who developed the media format they would be using on the discs, CDI. Now, for numerous reasons, this didn't end up happening, and because of some of those reasons, Sony went on to make their own gaming system, the PlayStation, which is a whole nother story. But for Philips' end, they were already planning on making the CDI, but as part of their deal with Nintendo, they got licensing rights to using some of their properties, which they did to horrible effect.
Go now, my princess, restore the celestial signs and rescue Link.
Remember, where there's smoke,
There's fire.
The CDI has a number of games based on Nintendo franchises, including a bizarre arcade game called Mario's Hotel, but probably even more famous is a number of Legend of Zelda games they made, which, to their credit, some were a little progressive because they actually featured Zelda as a playable protagonist, but this was all heavily balanced out by the fact that these games were awful. Let's go play one. Alright, let's give this a try. So, I at least know how this starts, because I've seen this opening cutscene so many times on the internet, and it is an abomination. This is... I found out actually eventually that this wasn't done in-house with the company that made the game. This was all outsourced to an animation company in Russia. And so that's why it's kind of this weird disjoint between how this looks and then how everything looks in the actual game. It's just, it's bizarre.
Enough. How about a kiss for luck?
You've got to be kidding.
Squadala, we are off.
Yeah, this is weird. I've heard some arguments before that this is actually kind of a good game if you ignore the cutscenes, because those are just bad. But it's hard for me to believe that while I play this. I think I'm a little biased because for the timing of when this came out, this game is based on the playstyle of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, which is all the weird kind of side-scrolly style, and I just don't really care for that at all. It's so hard to tell what's really going on in this game. It's weird too because you get hit by all these things and you don't react, like you don't fall back or anything, you just kind of keep getting hit. And like you have a shield which I think you can kind of block with, but you can't move it except by dodging or jumping or crouching. So this one in particular, this is Link: The Faces of Evil, where this is the one game where you do play as Link. There were 2 other Zelda games they made. One was kind of a companion piece to this where you play as Zelda called Zelda: The Wand of Gamelin, I think. And then there's a 3rd one that's just called Zelda's Adventure. And that one's like a top-down, but from what I understand, that's somehow even worse than this.
Look at it the dinosaurs from the dinosaur show, like the kid?
Yeah.
Teenager?
Yeah, the, oh god, what was it called? What's bizarre about it too is that I don't feel like I really have any idea of what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, at least in Zelda games, when they give you very little information, you kind of figure it out along the way. It's intuitive. This is just weird. Oh, you talk to people by hitting them with your sword. That makes sense. And then they pop up and this is weird looking. FMV games, standing for full motion video games, were really popular during the late 80s and early 90s, and it was an alternative to more traditional games that were basically interactive movies. They didn't offer the same amount of actual gameplay as more traditional games, but they offered visuals well beyond what a lot of their competition could do. Thanks to the CDI actually being more of a multimedia system, they were able to support a lot of these kind of games, including ports of really popular arcade ones like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, and even had some really successful original ones like Burn Cycle. But this was basically too little too late, because while these games were cool, they still required you to buy a very expensive system that wouldn't actually even run them out of the box. You'd have to buy a separate component called a digital video cartridge, which would enable the system to run videos as well as FMV-based games like these. Otherwise, any other games you played on the CDI were honestly pretty lacking. The FMV support was cool, but other games, it just didn't have any of the processing power to do anything interesting or better than its competition. While the initial price tag was insane, Philips did try to control it a little bit by releasing a lot of different submodels of the CDI down the line, including a cheaper option that was meant to be more like a straight-up game console, the 450, which is actually the one we got set up right over here. Still though, even with these cool FMV games and cheaper models made available later, it wasn't enough to counter all of the lost investment in the system, where the CDI ended up being abandoned in 1998 after Philips reported having a total loss of $1 billion, making this not only the most expensive console to buy when it came out, but even one of the most expensive consoles to make.